India-US-Iran geopolitics ignited at sea. Hello, I'm Asuma Katauka and you're watching another episode of Explained with me. 3 oil tankers, 1 midnight interception, and a geopolitical ripple stretching from Mumbai to Washington, D.C. and all the way to Iran. On this episode of Explained, we dive into a high-stakes maritime operation that has sent ripples across global energy markets and diplomatic corridors alike. Earlier this month, India intercepted and seized 3 oil tankers operating roughly 100 nautical miles off of the coast of Mumbai. Vessels whose identification numbers reportedly match ships sanctioned by the U.S. Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control for alleged links to Iran. The vessels Stellar Ruby, Asphalt Star and Al Jafziya were intercepted by the Indian Coast Guard following what officials described as suspicious activity involving mid-sea operations. The ships were later escorted to Mumbai for further investigation, marking one of India's most visible crackdowns on suspected sanctions evasion in recent years. What makes the seizure particularly significant is the alleged link to U.S. sanctions. Reports indicate that the International Maritime Organization numbers of the 3 ships matched vessels previously sanctioned by the U.S. Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control. Under U.S. records, those vessels were listed as Global Peace, Chill 1 and Glory Star 1. The matching IMO numbers suggest the ships may have changed names, a common tactic used by so-called shadow fleet operators to avoid detection. Lately, the concept of a shadow fleet has become central to global sanctions enforcement. These are typically older oil tankers operating through complex ownership structures, often registered in non-restricting jurisdictions. They frequently switch names, flags, and documentations to mask the origin of sanctioned oil. One of the known key tactics involves ship-to-ship transfers in international waters, where oil is transferred from a sanctioned vessel to another tanker, effectively obscuring its origin before it reaches its final destination. This practice makes enforcement difficult and allows sanctioned crude to enter global markets at steep discounts. Shipping data cited in reports suggests that at least 2 of the intercepted vessels had operational links to Iran. Stellar Ruby was reportedly flagged in Iran, while Al Jafziya is said to have transported Iranian fuel oil to Djibouti in 2025. Asphalt Star primarily operated along China-linked routes. However, Iranian state media, quoting the National Iranian Oil Company, denied any connection between the seized tankers and the company, stating that neither the ships nor their cargoes were linked to it. Whether directly state-controlled or operated through intermediaries, the broader pattern aligns with how sanctioned oil is often traded globally. Because sanctioned crude carries legal and financial risk, it is typically sold at significant discounts. Intermediaries rely on layered corporate ownership, falsified documents, and mid-sea cargo transfers to reduce traceability. The result is a gray market that continues to function despite former sanctions on regimes. The timing of India's action is geopolitically notable. The seizure comes amid improving relations between New Delhi and Washington. Earlier this month, the United States announced it would reduce import tariffs on Indian goods from 50% to 18%. Reports also indicate that India agreed to hold imports of Russian oil as part of broader trade and diplomatic recalibrations. Against this backdrop, India's enforcement action may be read as a signal of closer alignment with US-led sanctions compliance, though New Delhi has not explicitly framed it that way. At the same time, India's move can be interpreted as a sovereign maritime enforcement decision rather than a political alignment. India sits at a strategic crossroads in the Arabian Sea, a major corridor for global energy flows. Allowing ship-to-ship transfers of questionable origin within its exclusive economic zone could expose it to financial, legal, and diplomatic risks. By intercepting the vessels, India reinforces control over its maritime domain and protects custom and regulatory interests. Following the seizure, surveillance operations were reportedly intensified. Around 55 Coast Guard ships and 10 to 12 aircraft have been deployed for round-the-clock monitoring across key maritime zones. This expansion signals the operation was not an isolated act, but part of a broader effort to prevent India's waters from being used as staging grounds for sanctions evasion. The episode also reflects larger shifts in global energy geopolitics. As sanctions regimes expand and tighten, alternative shipping networks have grown more sophisticated. Countries that sit along key maritime routes are increasingly drawn into enforcement dynamics, whether by design or necessity. And as for India, which maintains strategic ties with the US while also managing historic relations with Iran and balancing energy security concerns, the calculus is delicate. Ultimately, this seizure is about more than 3 ships. It highlights the evolving nature of sanctions enforcement, the persistence of shadow oil trade, and India's emerging posture as a more assertive maritime power. That's all for this episode of Xplained. Stay tuned as we bring you more in-depth insights and stories that matter.